What's up, everyone? This is Q Grows, and I want to thank you for tuning in to this podcast. We've got a great one for you tonight. This is with David Bienenstock. This was recorded on November 29th, 2022. And before we jump into the podcast, I wanted to ask you to please consider supporting Cannabis and this podcast by going to our community, downloading the Cannabis app on your phone, or going to our website at cannabis.app and become a supporting member or subscribing to our community. You see here that you can become a Cannabis member. I'm showing on the screen here our different subscription options. We have associate producer for $14.99, and that will give you an entry into our monthly giveaways. We've got friends of the show that have hooked us up with some gifts that we can give away, or we'll have different Cannabis swag giveaways, things like that. Or you can just come in at $4.20 a month to support us and get access to our community and our own app. It's a fully featured cannabis social network that we've got there. It's members only, and you can come in and support, and we'd really appreciate it. So we have these different membership options. Please consider supporting. We'd really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get to the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Live. We're live right now on YouTube, youtube.com/Cannabis. Today, we're going to be talking to David Bienenstock from the Great Moments in Weed History podcast. We're super excited to talk to David. David's been around for a long time. He's been a journalist at High Times. He's written a lot of great articles all over the internet. One of the places that I've seen him especially is on Leafly. He's written a lot of great pieces over there. And of course, he's got the awesome podcast with Great Moments in Weed History. So tonight I'm joined by JR Token, my co-founder here at Cannabis. JR also put in a lot of work behind the scenes, one to get David to join on the stream tonight, and he also put together a lot of great questions. So super shout out to and thanks to JR for helping make this happen tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
So David, just to start us off, we'd love to have you kind of quickly introduce yourself, and we always love to hear about your kind of like weed origin story. Like, why are you passionate about weed? Why do you have a bunch of weed behind you on your Zoom background? We'd love to touch on that as well.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thanks for having me. Warm welcome to you both and everybody watching and listening. And yeah, I'm a journalist primarily, an author, and a podcaster. I've been covering cannabis for about 20 years. So that's, seems like a long time in modern weed years. But when we think of the 10,000 year history of humans and cannabis, maybe I don't seem so old. As you mentioned, my first job where I had to pay taxes in cannabis was working at High Times about 20 years ago. I certainly may or may not have slung a bag or two of cannabis before that as a youth. And it's been an incredible time in history in weed to be documenting this story. Going from, we're obviously still in the Prohibition era in a lot of places and can never forget that. Also through that medical cannabis era and the gray market era, and now into legalization. So I feel really honored to be able to chronicle this story as it happens as a journalist. And then as you mentioned, I co-host a podcast called Great Moments in Weed History with my partner on that show, Abdullah Saeed. And for the past 5 years, or coming up on 5 years, we've been telling stories about the history of this plant and us, the culture that loves this plant. And I feel very, very passionately about sharing that history, because otherwise it's going to be erased and it's going to be rewritten and it's going to be retold through the lens of market capitalism, and not be what we know to be the true history of this plant, which is one of resistance against this oppressive prohibition, but also all the benefits that we as a culture gain from this plant, and really need to share now with the rest of the world as we erode and continue to push back against prohibition. So it's been, from starting at High Times about 20 years ago. um, I've also did a series at Vice called Bong Appetit, which was about weed and food, and I wrote a lot there. That's where I met Abdullah, my co-host on the podcast. And now, as you say, I write a lot for Leafly. And I would just say, at the outset, I love this plant. I'd smoke this plant every day, and would have it be a part of my life no matter what I did for a living. But the true pleasure of this journey for me is all the people that I encounter around this plant, and having that sort of magic key to encounter growers and smugglers and people who went to jail for supplying this plant to medical patients, people who are breeders and growers. There's so many fascinating aspects to this story. It touches on so many things, from criminal justice and economics to creativity and medicine. So I'm always learning something new. I'm always encountering interesting people, and happy to have that streak continue tonight with y'all.
That's awesome. We are kind of in a journey of our own as far as cannabis goes, and we really are looking forward to what's to come in the future. We're making big transitions. A lot of things are changing, really rapidly, and so it's been a long time journey of watching this whole, like you said, this last 20 years, especially, the entire scene industry become kind of what it is today. And we're gonna kind of talk about that a little bit afterwards. But we wanted to start you off with some questions about the podcast, especially. What are You've done this for a while now, so what are kind of your top three moments in weed history that you've done up to this point?
Yeah, well, we have we're coming up on our 100th episode. So that's a lot of stories, and I think it's really subjective. I think different people will, find that's what's great about history. It's all of these stories, and you're going to find ones that connect with your own life and your own experience. So I could only say what I think are maybe the episodes that resonate deepest with me. One I would say is about an organization in California called WHAM, that grew a collective garden to supply cannabis to terminally and chronically ill people who couldn't otherwise afford it. And their activism, like other people's, it started with the AIDS epidemic, and really seeing that this could be a life-saving and life-changing medicine for people. They were eventually raided by the DEA for simply giving cannabis away to the desperately ill people. But and when I say raided, this was 30 armed DEA agents with guns drawn, on a group of people doing the most compassionate work possible with this plant. Long story short, you can listen to the episode for the longer
Yeah.
version, but they 2 weeks later, with the mayor of the town that they were in, because they were so well known for this good work, they gave cannabis out on the steps of City Hall. Thousands of people came out to support them, and ultimately the DEA backed down, and then they sued the federal government and won an injunction. So just an unbelievably impactful story for the whole culture, but also one really about just uh, communities coming together to share this plant. And when you understand how profound the healing that people get from cannabis is, then you can also understand how somebody could be brave enough to take these kinds of risks with their personal freedom, to share it with others. So I was fortunate enough to live in that town for a while, long after these events occurred, but to be a WAM volunteer. And so it's a very personal story to me, and also just one that I think everyone needs to know. And when we talk about, like, how did cannabis become legal, and we hear, oh, because of the tax money and because big business is gonna make a bunch of money on, well, that was always true, but it was only when people risked and often, too often, lost their freedoms uh, to engage in civil disobedience against these terrible laws. That's what changed them. And stories like the Wham story really drive that home, while also, I hope, inspiring people now in their own lives. Another one of my favorites is, I won't be as long-winded on all of them. That we have an episode about the history of cannabis and jazz, which I've always found super fascinating, and also just, too many people have the misconception that cannabis culture, started in the '60s with a bunch of hippies, but when we talk about the jazz musicians of the '20s and '30s recording songs about weed, it shifts people's perspectives. And then when we have episodes about, Majoun being an edible that's 1,000 years old in Morocco, passed down in family recipes and everything, that really can shift people's perspectives. So, I think understanding this as a really, really old culture, and one that existed long before prohibition too. That's another point. Prohibition is the anomaly in the history of humans in this plant, and it says a lot about the times that we live in and the mindset of the people who are in authority. So, I definitely a strain that runs through the podcast is, yeah, we need to be extremely skeptical of the authorities if the people in charge think this incredibly beneficial plant is somehow to be used as a justification for arresting people and targeting people, and of course doing so disproportionately to people of color and people with less money and younger people. So, history is, to me, really fascinating. We wouldn't do this show if we didn't find it very fascinating, but it's also really reflective of our own times and can sometimes help us understand our own times by looking in the past. And it's also, it's a humor show. So, we do definitely, our first episode was Willie Nelson smoked a joint on the roof of the White House. So if you can't have fun telling that story, get into a different business, I think.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to like hit on that in terms of I really enjoy the format of your show that you guys do. One of the things that you encourage people to do is light up a joint, engage the endabulator, I think is one of the things that you say. You just you have a couple of things that you say, and then you do the great moments in weed history thing. And I love for people that haven't listened or watched the show before, the dynamic between you and your co-host is one where you've done all the research and you're kind of telling this story, and your co-host, at least at the beginning, has to kind of guess who you're talking about, or who the or what the moment is. And so I always kind of enjoy that part of the format as we kind of all go along with you on this story. That's really interesting, and I really love like the things that you talked about, or the points that you made earlier, are some of the things that I really love about this show, which is getting a bigger perspective of how cannabis fits in the greater scheme of history, and how people have been using cannabis for a really long time. It's not just been, since the 70s, like you said, since like the hippies didn't invent weed or whatever. Weed's been around for a long time. One of the things that I wanted to, JR and I both wanted to talk about, and I felt like you just talked about it for a bit, so maybe let's jump on it, which is, how do you think we should change the laws and legislation and rules that are around cannabis? Because as you've talked about a couple times tonight already, the things, the way that the industry is working now and the rules that are in place, they don't really reflect how the cannabis industry and the cannabis community should be doing things, right? It's really empowering people that we don't really want to empower, or it's empowering the wrong people, and the people that should be getting involved, they're often not able to. Do you, maybe we would love to hear your thoughts on kind of what you think the next steps should be, and what people could do where they are to make a change happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when we talk about legalization, the most important thing to always remember and focus on is it is primarily about ending these arrests. And that is the thing that has been devastating people's lives and whole communities. And that's the thing that has to stop. And it is absolutely a bummer to me to see capitalism capitalize. And I can't sugarcoat things and say, that we're going to live in a system called of capitalism and not have capital have its say. So don't ever lose sight of the tremendous good that happens by ending these arrests. And what people don't always kind of realize also is, like, if you live in a legal state, maybe yesterday was the day you were going to get busted. And not just get arrested for weed, but maybe lose your job because of a piss test, or all of these negative outcomes. So that's the first thing. But to get to the larger point, it's going to be a fight at every step for every inch of market share between cannabis people and money people. And ultimately, we're just going to push that line as far as we can. And that's all we can do. Except this, I think, for activist people, for grassroots people, for weed people, the best place to focus our energy in terms of how these legalization systems are going to work is to insist on home grow. Real, actual home grow. If you can grow this plant yourself, you can take care of yourself and, to be clear, a lot of other people. If you can grow 6 outdoor plants like they were tomato plants, and you live in almost anywhere, you can grow enough cannabis, good quality cannabis, to take care of 20 people or more. And if each one of us is able to do that, well, then it doesn't, they're only going to be able to sell it for so much at the store if we have a lot of people growing it and giving it away. And that's our best way to, and so if it's not legal where you live now, that's the issue to push. Okay, we don't really have to convince people anymore to legalize weed. Although obviously in a couple of states that just voted on it, it didn't pass. So it's like, there's all that work to be done, but that's the thing we should be insisting on in every one of these laws. And that's the thing that they can't really take away from you once you have it. And that's the thing that can be a real counterbalance to super high prices at the dispensary, to locking people out of the industry. Ultimately, what we all want is to just grow and share this plant. So let's make sure that that's written into the law.
I think it's really amazing that you just kind of summed up the whole thing that me and Sam are fighting for, our entire mission statement. Along with home grows, we would like to see more micro licensing. We think the beer industry in the beginning of microbrews did a great job of taking their beer back. They started getting people interested in home brewing. They started going to get active in their community and start pushing. And that's kind of one of the questions we have is how can we start emulating that kind of path to kind of bring that back to cannabis?
Yeah, I think it's much easier to get what you want when the law is being written than to have changes made, particularly changes that are going to be seen as hostile by the industry. So I would say, if you are in a state that has not legalized yet, get active now. You can't get active. Hey, if I was saying this 2 years later, now is still the best time to get active. But if you can start pushing that message before legalization happens, you can have the most effect at the local level where you live. And if you show up consistently, you're going to be listened to more. People are going to come in with money and try to buy access and do politics the way politics is done. But many, many issues in this country really do have the ear of grassroots communities if you can be present and consistent. And then I would say, be the change you want to see in the world. So if I do what I do, maybe well, maybe not. But if you think that being the equivalent of a small brewery of cannabis is the future that you want to see in the world, and you have a love for the plant, and you want to do it the right way, pursue that. Make it happen. It's a daunting path, but so is anything worthwhile. And I would just encourage people, um, the earlier you start. Now, if it's not legal where you are, I have no moral, obvious problem with people breaking these very unjust laws. But, there's two different things. If you're going to live outside the law, that's its own way of life, and you need to respect it and manage your risks. And what I'm saying is, if you think, well, I'd like to be like a small brewery when it's legal, start taking steps now. Have your plan of how you're going to do that when it's possible. Talk to local lawmakers and say, listen, we want to build a local industry of mom and pop businesses, and here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to be here every step of the way fighting for that market share that we want, and you'll find allies. And there's already people doing this kind of work wherever you live. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can find the local community of people. And, not everybody that wears a suit is an evil capitalist bastard. And not everybody with a tie-dye shirt on is chill. Like, don't make that mistake.
Yeah.
But you'll be able to find the people who have the right vision and the right heart, and you can join forces with them, um, and lend your energies to that now, and start to build and push that community, and efforts that you make now will pay off 10 and 100-fold down the road because you've started early on that path.
Right. Um, Speaking of kind of new things that you've been or things that you've been up to lately, and kind of the podcast, I've noticed that you guys have been doing live tours and doing like live shows, and you've been taking the podcast on the road. Could you talk about that? I'd love to hear, like, what's that like? I know you guys have done shows in the past. I mean, JR and I both have seen you at like Emerald Cup in the past. But it seems like you kind of been doing this more often out with people at comedy clubs and stuff like that. I would love to hear more about it.
It's super fun. I never had a performance background, but this has kind of opened up that opportunity. We've done it at some comedy clubs. We did it at the Emerald Cup, and there's a festival actually in Humboldt County, a comedy festival every year. Hey, I would say anyone from anywhere, if you love weed and comedy, and you want to just take the stoner trip of a lifetime, up at a place called Savage Henry Comedy Club, right in the heart of harvest time in Humboldt. There's this comedy festival, and they bring about 100. You're not going to see uh, the world's most famous comedians, but you're going to see working road comics, people who really, have their craft. And it's right in Humboldt, in the heart of, right in the middle of harvest season. And now things are like more opened up. So you can arrange a tour to go look at some gardens, and go to different grows and dispensaries, and experience the culture in a way that, really, being honest, 10 years ago, people go up to Humboldt to grow a bunch of weed and be left the fuck alone. And I wouldn't be telling people, but they know they have, they're opening up. Not everybody, but the
Right.
community is opening up, and they want you to come. If you love weed and you're chill, nobody wants a bunch of assholes to come be tourists where they live. But so anyway, that was we've done the show a few times as part of that comedy festival, and I would say that's the best time we've had doing it, because of all the factors that I just mentioned. And I try to be a big supporter of the community up in Humboldt, because they've brought so much amazing cannabis into the world and spread it around so prodigiously, and also they've been through so much. We did an episode of Great Moments in weed history about how, when the helicopter raids started up in Humboldt, these were federal, state task force operations. These were often people, who had recently been flying helicopters in Vietnam, would come home, and they put them to work terrorizing the growers of Humboldt County, California. And what this episode is about is how they formed their own community radio station, so that they could kind of monitor the police and warn people over this radio station. Hey, we've got a convoy of police vehicles going up Salmon Creek Road. Be on the lookout. We see helicopters flying west over this ridge. And this is all before the internet, and because people were able to have their radios tuned to this station, if you got a 25-minute head start on the convoys coming, and you can grab your to-go bag and get the fuck out of there, that's the difference between living to fight another day and maybe spending a decade in prison, based on the laws back then. And this radio station called K-Mud is still on the air, still 100% volunteer run and community supported. And we now do interviews on the show as well, and just being able to interview this woman named Agnes, who was she was herself a grower in that era, and also one of the founders of this organization that monitored the police, and one of the founders of KMUD, the radio station. So there's an example of like this incredible history story, and it's recent enough that we're able to talk to somebody who lived it. So anyway, I have a lot of I veered off from your question, but I have a lot of love for Humboldt County and going up and doing the shows there, and it's just very gratifying to get to meet people who like what we do, and share a story with them and get that immediate reaction in the room. So yeah, we love to do the live shows.
Yeah. And are you guys going to be, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm up in the Portland, Oregon area, and I was not feeling well when you guys came to town. I wasn't able to make it. Really wished I could have seen you guys. And Sam is down in the Vallejo area, and he recently did for Cannabis put together sponsored a little cannabis comedy hour night.
Oh, yeah.
And it was good. It's part of our history. You probably don't know a lot about Cannabis. We were a social media app. It was me and Q who basically started it. We started with no investment money, and we kind of tried to build it from the ground up. And recently that got changed. And yeah, I just think that we're really excited to see where this, like I said, this whole journey is going to be taking us now that things are moving so rapidly. And we also wanted to maybe talk to you a little bit about Smoking Pot Properly, one of the books that you've done, and that a lot of people can get a lot of really good enjoyment. We picked a few out. We want to be really respectful of your time, but can you talk a little bit about Smoking Pot Properly, the book, and what it kind of brings to the table, the coffee table?
Yeah, well, it's good to roll a joint on for starters, but almost every book meets that standard. Yeah, it's a book I wrote a few years ago. It's sort of How to Smoke Pot Properly is definitely a tongue-in-cheek title. I think as long as you inhale and don't cough too much, you probably got it. But it's really about things I learned through reporting on this plant and different people really that I encountered, and how they integrate this plant into their lives and into their journeys. And I mentioned earlier all the different aspects of life that cannabis intersects with. So it did seem to me like trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who might be newer to this culture. Every single day, somebody, and really multiple people, are not just smoking weed for the first time, but are having that kind of profound experience. It could certainly be a medicinal experience. If you have never smoked weed in your life, and you go through some chemotherapy, and somebody gives you a joint, and you understand how much different that experience can be, that's going to change your life and your perspective to this plant forever. If you maybe have that experience where you smoke a weed, a lot of people say, "Oh, I had a terrible experience with cannabis." Now, I don't discount what people's experiences are, but what happened, man? The time I smoked weed, I just thought about what an asshole I was and how many people I'd hurt. Yeah, man, you need that. I needed that when that happened to me. You know what I mean? Like, if you can open your ears to that and get past the unpleasantness of it, and really use it as a tool to think about yourself and to reflect on yourself, um, you know, you're going to get so much more out of it. And then, of course, just like so many things that can really seem overwhelming, what different strains are, how to, make edibles, these things that, traditionally your stoner uncle or your older brother's friend or, your cool older sister would teach you and initiate you into. Just trying to make a guidebook for people that's also very welcoming and that also represents some of the deeper values of this culture, which is about inclusion and mutual support. And because we've been marginalized by these laws, well, that has all these terrible effects that we talked about, being arrested, people who having their children taken away, losing your job, some of the most profoundly terrible things that can happen to you. But it's also made us as a community, I think, embrace these values of inclusion, of tolerance, of mutual support, of kindness. I say in the book, smoking weed's not the cure for being an asshole, but it's a good place to start. So if I can help people on that journey with the plant, I'm happy. I'm happy to do it, and I know I've heard from people who enjoy the book, so that's it's nice to contribute something to the conversation.
Do you think that kind of changing of the heart and opening of the compassion and empathy is kind of a common theme that goes along with entheogenic plants and fungi?
I do. I think that these plant medicines, or however you want to refer to them, they're important. And like we live in the timeline where they've been suppressed and oppressed and kept away from people, and I think we see the results of that. The one thing I think we all have in common is nobody thinks that things are being well run by those in authority. You know, uh, I might have a very different view of what's going wrong, but I don't
Right.
think anybody thinks it's going right. And another line that I have in the book is cannabis isn't anti-authoritarian because it's illegal. It's illegal because it's anti-authoritarian. I do think there's something inherent in the experience of being high on weed that makes you question authority. And of course, the authorities are not going to like that. And particularly, people who are abusing authority don't want to be questioned. Perhaps if we had wise and compassionate leadership, we would smoke weed, question authority, and say, yeah, awesome. Like, I'm so glad that the authorities are doing such a good job. And I'm certainly, don't mistake me for referring to like our current president or this or that. I'm just saying in general.
In general.
And but we often smoke some weed, question authority, and are confirmed in our views that something is deeply wrong. And so, you know, that's not to oversell it. There's a lot of deeply fucked up authoritarian people who smoke weed. It's not a magic bullet. It's not gonna get us out of this, but it's certainly a great place to start. I can only speak to my own experience and my observed experience, but there is a lot of value, and there is. I think a common experience. Often people have that experience of questioning themselves or questioning the authorities, and they just tense up and react against it, and it can confirm them in their but I do think in general most people really benefit from that kind of experience. So.
So, before you headed out tonight, I wanted to ask you real quick, are you going to be at the Emerald Cup this year? And are you an Emerald Cup judge again this year? Because you were last year, right?
Yeah, we did a fun episode of the podcast about. I got to say, I'm a huge supporter of the Emerald Cup. I think they do a fantastic job and a really, really important role in the culture in putting on such a high quality event at that scale. There's a lot of great events, but really to be at that scale. And yes, I will be at the Emerald Cup. Anybody, within the sound of this, definitely, like, I have a website, davidbienenstock.com, or contact us through the Great Moments in Weed History. Just DM us on Instagram if you're going to be at the Emerald Cup and you dig the show and you want to say hi. And I'll definitely make it a priority to blaze one with you. If you both will be there, it would be
Yeah, we
great.
will.
Obviously, then we'll definitely make that happen. Well, we're not performing the show, just to be clear,
Yeah.
this year, but I'm going to be an edibles judge
Oh,
once
cool.
again this year.
Oh, that's great. Will we see you at the on Friday night at Frenchy Cannoli's movie premiere?
Before the
Like,
cup, you
yeah,
mean, or
yeah,
the?
yeah. It's like the Friday night before. There's a movie
Friday
Oh
night.
premiere.
yeah, definitely. I've been looking forward to seeing that film for sure. So yeah, let's meet up there.
Cool,
Yeah, my
man.
flight gets in right at 55, so I'll be just a tiny bit late.
Well, David, before you go, you did mention real quick that you had another kind of project in the works. So I did want to give you an opportunity to give that a shout out, and anything else that you want to make sure that our listeners or our viewers check out from you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm working on a new podcast called Jazz Cabbage. It's going to be a limited series telling the history of cannabis and jazz music. It's gonna sort of have the production values of like an NPR type show, so I'm really excited about it. I'm hoping it will really kind of uh, reach people with just a casual interest in cannabis and kind of pull them in. So you can go and subscribe to both those podcasts now. Jazz Cabbage, there's a trailer up, so you can get a little bit of a taste for it. And the first episode's actually going to come out in just a couple of weeks. So I would just love people to experience that, and of course, Great Moments in Weed History is the other show. And yeah, I should shout out again a lot of journalism at Leafly, so I like to shout them out as well. And yeah, it's been great getting cannabuzzed with you, and we're gonna definitely do it IRL at the Emerald Cup.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, David. We really do appreciate it. JR, thanks so much for getting David on the show and for all your work tonight. Do you want to do any last shout outs, JR, before we head out?
I would just like to say that, things have moved along really fast, so we're ready for smoking pot properly too.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's do it.
Nice, man. Well, I smoked one before the show, so I pre-gamed it. But thanks everyone who's watching. Please give us a subscribe on YouTube, like and subscribe to the video and all that, all the YouTuber stuff. YouTube.com/Cannabuzz. And also shout out to Tiki Madman. He's helping make our Emerald Cup possible. So make sure to check out
Shout
Tiki
out,
Madman.
Tiki. We love you.
Yeah, check out tikimadman.com if you need some great seeds, if you want to grow some of your own weed at home. Well, thank you so much, David. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you again soon, and make sure to enjoy some weed. Peace.
Growers love.